It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Rob, and welcome back to my little nook of the internet, where I do my State of the Dungeon address. Well, this was the State of the Dungeon for the game that took place on the 23rd of December. A Christmas game. Pretty fitting because it was a Christmas adventure. This was, of course, my very first running of A Strangely Gooey Holiday, an adventure that I wrote and Gooey Cube published. So, it was very exciting for everybody involved, I'm sure. And it gave us a chance to get back to the characters that we had first met when we were beginning The Darkest Dream, in what was certainly, in my experience, one of the most immersive games that I've ever run, and just a lot of fun with a lot of interesting pieces, some dungeon crawling, some great NPC interactions, where the players got to get a sense of belonging to this interesting group of NPCs, and tell a story that got increasingly more tense and finally ended in this huge cliffhanger. So, of course, when we came back to the characters, I teleported them all the way from there. Now, I brought them to, they blinked out, passed out, woke up, or actually, they didn't even pass out. They just kind of, everything went black, and then everything went light again, and they're standing in a snowy town, very small village, with a single tavern that they're standing in front of, and obviously many, many miles away from where the troop is. They didn't have any sense that time had changed, but quite clearly they could not have covered this distance without some serious magic in the space. And it was now daytime, whereas when they last were conscious, it was nighttime. So, another thing is, this place is snowy. Where they were wasn't yet. Oh yeah, the snows were going to come, but this place had already been, had snow drifts, and the group was not dressed for this. So, they got Haranan up, who had passed out at the end of the last adventure, and decided to go into the tavern. There really wasn't any other place to go except go house to house and talk to the yokels. So they went into the tavern. And while there were a few of the locals who were there drinking, because, you know, a couple of them looked like they were farmers, and, well, the fields were fallow in the snow, it also was pretty clear that this town was ready for winter's dance. It was decorated a bit, although rustically. And the group came in. The locals noticed them, but didn't really react, or what were they going to say to a group of young but well-armed adventuring types. And they went to the tavern keep and found out that they were, of course, quite a long ways from Nevermore, where the last carnival was, and no idea of how they got there. So, what to do? Well, they tried to get clothes, but the tavern keep really didn't have a lot of extra clothes, especially ones that would have fit everybody, like Haranan, who is huge compared to the locals here. So, really, their best bet would probably be to go to the wizard and procure clothing. Who's the wizard? Well, there's one wizard nearby, the great Elphinius Goo. And he, well, just so happened to need some help. There's a notice on the board over there. They go over a notice, and the sign says, "Help wanted. Brave types to come and help me to decorate my house for winter's dance. Cowards and fools should not apply. But you will be paid in gold and in magic." Well, that seemed pretty good. And they... What? So they inquired and they were told to go out to a dock and a boat would take them to the Tower of Goo. So they pretty promptly left and went out, and at the end of a dock they saw a small boat which barely had enough room for all of them, standing room, as well as the captain, who was a Myroon. Myroon are small, almost gnomish people with kind of an aqua blue colored skin, favoring tattoos, generally white hair, and this one was relaxing on the deck of his ship, even though it's cold out for everybody else. He didn't seem to be too bothered by it. And there was a young half-elf who was running around taking care of the roping on the boat. They came up, arranged to be transported. He took their coin, which didn't charge very much, and whisk, with a single word, all the ropes magically entwined back into the ship. The ship pushed off out into the water, and it began sailing downstream. A lot of the river was frozen with ice packs, but the boat was small enough that it fit along the channel of flowing water on, near to the bank. And again, no work really having to be done by anybody on board, and it feeling very, very, very stable and secure. The group actually was fairly comfortable on their hour-long trip to get to the Tower of Goo, which, as it turned out, was on an island set in the middle of this river, and they could see it from the water. It's this somewhat... So, they got their first look at the Tower of Goo. Quite rustic. All kind of standing alone, but with an excellent view of the surrounding countryside, which is relatively low and flat around. They were let off the boat, traveled up the snow-free path to the tower, and got up to the door, which they saw was a very strong door with an iron knocker on it in the shape of a grinning frog. They boldly moved up and used the knocker to rap on the door, and a few moments later were met by a young dwarfen lass with ink-stained hands and apprentice robe. She asked if they were there for the job, and they said they were, so she invited them in. And she led them through a hall, a parlor, and then at the end, she gestured for them to wait and be quiet while she listened at the door. Once she was there, she heard some sort of an altercation going on, and this was between two wizards who were in the next room, one of whom you're going to be very familiar with. The other is Alphinius Goo. Yes, Alphinius. Good friend, powerful wizard. Of course, his opponent was Zixgramus, the handsomest wizard in this game. But anyhow, Zix was not happy because Alphinius seemed to have pulled one over on him, and a piece that he had not noticed had caused him to lose his match. In a game of Zis is the Xanathian version of chess. It's a little bit different, a little bit more complicated, but time-honored traditional game for intellectual superiors. So, once the door opened, because the apprentice was a little disturbed, it sounded like they were, Zix was getting a little upset, they came into the room, and Zix said, "Well, you're babysitting today, I see. Well, I don't like children." Whew. Teleported away. My cameo. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anyhow, it's nice when you write things, you can write yourself into the story like that, which I did. I assure you, Alphinius told me I should do it. But that left them with Alphinius, who basically was very pleased to see them, and unfortunately with my lack of a voice, because I had kind of developed a nasty cold around Christmas time, I can't do justice to Elphinius's voice, but at the time I was on point. Elphinius was very happy to see them. They were instantly fast friends, and he wanted them to go to his basement and help him get his winter dance decorations as soon as possible. However, the party was smart. They asked, well, what's the problem? What do you need us for? What's the exact job? He's like, well, all right. My winter's dance ornaments have been cursed. Every year they turn into monsters that try to kill me. So every year I have to go and I have to beat down the monsters, transform them back into ornaments, and then I can bedeck them for the year. But this year it's your job. It's good work for young adventurers like you. Go have at it. And they were happy to do so. Now, because when he asked them if they had any healers, Vanessa didn't just pop up and say, well, yes, I'm a healer. I'm druid. No, they all kind of looked about each other and coyly said, well, sort of. So Elphinius slipped them a couple of healing potions on the side, too, so they're pretty well equipped as it stands. So he brought them to the basement door and said, okay, I'm going to let you in. You have to destroy all the monsters, the ones that are cursed ornaments. When you destroy them, they will turn into the ornaments. You have to gather them all up and put them at the silver chest that's at the back of the basement. Bring that up here, and you'll get paid. And be quick, because my wife is coming home soon, and she expects those to be ready. And I don't want to disappoint her, so I will give you half pay if you are late. So, try not to take too many rests in between is basically the lesson that needed to be learned there. So they agreed. He opened the door. They went down the stairs, and he, with a final, oh, and try not to hurt Goobert. He won't attack you unless you attack him. Ha-ha! And then he locked them in the basement. So, that's how their relationship with Elphinius started. It was beautiful. So they go down into the basement, which is absolutely in an uproar. They can hear things breaking, things screeching. It is bedlam down there. And they can also see that the basement is this large, round structure. Clearly the foundations of the tower go down to form this basement. But he's got that basement so full of junk that rises from floor to ceiling, creating veritable aisles and corridors through these crates and boxes and barrels that he's got stacked one on top of the other all the way up to the roof. It can't be crawled over. You actually have to walk amongst it all. And as they were to find out, it was all kinds of things that, at least in this section, that he himself didn't want to deal with. So, upon the occasional missed blow or upon searching the area, they found that some of these various boxes were filled with things like slightly used kitty litter or old holy socks that never got laundered or spoiled beer in some of the crates. So there was a lot of range of different things they could find. Eventually, by following the rule in a maze of following the right-hand wall, they found the door leading out of this section of the basement. Unfortunately, it was sealed by 3 chains that ran through the door and through the wall, too, mystically. And there was a note on the door with a little bit of a puzzle for the things they would need to get through the door. And of course, this is the time that I don't have that puzzle, but it's very clever. It was written by a very good person, I've heard. So, they then, since they didn't have any way of getting rid of these chains, they turned and they continued on. The first thing they came across wasn't really a monster that was making a great deal of noise. What it looked like was a dead end, and there's a pool of spilled beige goo, which upon investigation rose up to be the Nog Man. So yes, this thing came up and started attacking Brandel, because Brandel was the curious one that night. And they defeated it straight away. It was kind of a slippery opponent, but, well, it took them a round or two to shake off the rust, we'll just say. Their attack rolls weren't doing so well to start out with, but on the other hand, I couldn't hit very well either, so eventually they turned things around and beat it down. Once they did, they got to search around a little bit, and they found a stein, a fine ceramic stein, which was full of enchanted cold eggnog. Smells delicious. They thought this might be one of those things they needed to get through the door, so they just carried it with them. And they continued on. Again, by just following the right-hand wall and going in and out of various rooms, they next found an absolute destruction fest. Boxes that were being crushed, and the source of this, they were to find, were these giant nutcrackers. Rawr. And thus began a great brawl. Now, these nutcrackers were a lot tougher than the Nogman was, in that their boxy hides were kind of hard for them to get in and do some damage to. Their natural armor was a bit tougher. However, their Alpha Strike was amazing. They dropped the king of the nutcrackers very quickly. He didn't get a single shot on them. And then they took out the one with the red hat just about as quickly. But that last one, oh, that last one laid a pinch on Brandel and bit her, and while they tried to rescue her, it went gulp, put her entirely in its mouth and started chewing. She's a wizard. That's not good. She was knocked out by this further abuse. So, the rest of them finally defeated it with a flurry of blows, and she was expelled out of the creature. In their place were 3 actual little nutcrackers, beautifully made. But these would turn out to be some of those ornaments that Alphinius wants them to collect, so they did. So after finding that and rousing Brandel again, which she's a wizard, it doesn't take a lot of healing to get her going, they continued exploring. The next thing that they should find may get the order mixed up a little bit on some of these, but these were the creatures. You can trust that. They fought a giant snowman. Well, he really wasn't giant. You know, that tall top hat of his made him seem a bit bigger. But when it came down to fighting, it was pretty dirty. It was able to pluck handfuls of snow and fling it at people in the far rows, so it didn't just have to concentrate on Haranen in the front. The fight kind of got a bit chaotic, too, especially since Brandel really only has Shocking Grasp as an attacking cantrip. So she keeps prodding her way up there and zapping at these things, and then immediately getting smacked around. So it's an interesting dynamic. But for what it's worth, the snowman didn't give them a great deal of trouble. They managed to fell it relatively quickly. So they immediately broke to searching around and finding what else they could find, or finding where the ornament was, and that snowman got back up again and attacked. And boy, did it do a number on poor Crendon, who the bard wasn't looking, and the thing just came up behind and slashed him across the back. Well, they dropped it again, and this time they took its hat off, which that pretty much ended it. And of course now Vanessa has a beautiful looking top hat to go with her normal ensemble. So, they did eventually find the snowman statuette too, since it had been destroyed by this point. And the snowman statuette was yet another thing that they needed. The final thing that they should fight in this section was a giant fruitcake of doom. Yes, this particular horror was a double threat, as not only could it charge and slam into people, but then bite with that fearsome mouth, but it also had a risk of poisoning people because it was so saturated in brandy that anybody who would get bitten by it had a risk of getting drunk too. Which almost happened to Haranen. Haranen was making saving throws left and right. He was insane. That boy enjoyed some really nice dice rolling, I'll tell you that. And he made it pay. He definitely was a champion of the fights in this game. But not everybody enjoyed the same amount of luck and fortune, and it became kind of a struggle. Until Brandel, again, feast or fortune, really. She tried to attack it with her shocking grasp. She rolled a 1. She, rolling to see what she randomly hit, took her shocking grasp and punched her hand into a side of a barrel. That was full of lint. Now you might imagine what static shock and lint could happen. Yeah, it caught fire. So now her hand is in a barrel of burning lint. So what she did was she pulled it out and she didn't even pull it out. She picked up the barrel and she threw it at the fruitcake. When the flaming barrel hit that fruitcake, well, I did say it was full of spirits. Woof! It went up. And they had done enough damage to it that it completely burned away before it could do any more harm to them. It was a pretty impressive killing shot. All spawned by a natural 20, but hey, sometimes that or natural 1, but hey, that sometimes happens. Finally, they explored the last little cubby set aside in all of Elphinius's junk, and they were able to find a basin, a font that was kind of stuck off in a corner. And upon going up to it, a strange, misty form rose up from the font and asked them a question. A riddle. Which, after a little bit of deliberation and me having to repeat the riddle several times because they weren't expecting it, and it was an audio riddle. I wasn't going to hand them the handout because there was no physical thing for them to see. Eventually, Crendon's player figured out what the riddle was, and he answered correctly. So, instead, they got to meet this figure. This ghostly apparition is a spirit all the way thousands and thousands of years ago from the Aethernic Empire. And he was a scholar. A friend of Elphinius's in a way, too. A companion of his through his adventuring days. Bless you. And he was willing to help them. If they would bring him some things back, he could give them some suggestions on how they might proceed in the dungeon with a little bit more safety. He could explain a few details about the curse. The party was excited to hear this because, let's face it, as of right now, they hadn't really had a lot of information going on. And it could be very, very useful to know more about their adventure and their quest. He told them how to dispel the chains by presenting the items that they had found so far that answered the requirements of the riddle, which they then did. Only to find out that they were not completely done with this basement. There was a whole other section beyond. Again, laid out in a maze-like structure because of Elphinius being a horrible hoarder, as it turns out. And this time they looked around. This part of the basement was bricked, not directly underneath the tower. And, yeah, there's a little bit of a different vibe in this place. So they started exploring. They followed along, again, following the wall. And eventually they came to an area that was kind of sectioned off, and they heard hooves scraping on the brickwork. When what to their wondering eyes should appear but 3 horrifying, parodies of reindeer. Yeah, these little nightmares are my personal favorites as far as the horror show of my own adventure. And I will just say this. I was given the art before I wrote the adventure, so these ideas and all the monsters were inspired because of the art. So, but the group did pretty well against the reindeer. They had some nasty offensive capabilities, but I really couldn't land too much harm. That is, of course, until... who was it? Was it Crendon again, I believe? Just got gashed. Again. It was Brandel and it was Crendon. I'm fairly certain that Glyn never got attacked because he stayed in the back and shot with his bow, which makes sense. Horianen, I think I may have nicked him once. And Vanessa was busy throwing things most of the time, so she rarely took any direct attacks. But between Brandel and Crendon, the bard and the mage, that's where most of the damage got dished out. And they felled the reindeer and found cute little reindeer ornaments afterward. And they actually managed to find a fine elven cloak that was tucked away in some of the shelving in that back corner. Now, this had been a solid night of adventuring, exploration, and all that. They'd found a lot of interesting and fun things, but it was more than one night's worth of adventuring. So that's where we called it. Everybody had a good time. Everybody ate well. It was a lot of fun. But we are going to finish this adventure. So next time, hopefully, Ventov's player can come back and we can have a full party and finish off a strangely gooey holiday. But that, my friends, is a tale still in the telling. So until next time, thanks for joining me. Hope your holidays were happy. And until that next time, farewell.